Hi everyone, I'm Frank Clifford of the London School of Astrology. This is a series of interviews with expert master astrologers to discover how they approach client work and how they actually prioritize, synthesize, and interpret birth charts. We also discover how they go about communicating that information to their clients. Each session will introduce the astrologer's approach, and then we'll be looking at a chart or two with them to see this approach in practice. Each master astrologer is giving their time for an important cause, and the LSA is donating £150 per session to the charity selected by the astrologer. Our guest today, Laura Nalbandian, has chosen westsidebaby.org, an American charity that provides basics for children in need, particularly in the Seattle, Washington area. So let me introduce you to Laura. A second-generation astrologer, Laura Nalbandian began teaching and practicing astrology in 1986, following studies with the astrologer Jeffrey Green. Laura's mother, Maggie Nalbandian, ran the famous Astrology et al. Bookstore, which the family still owns and runs in Seattle. And Laura is best known as the organizer of many a thing, but organizer of the Norwalk Conference, which first began in 1984. And the conference has a unique ability to bring together an eclectic set of astrologers and astrologies each year. Laura was one of the founders of Kepler College and has created the Maggie A. Nalbandian Memorial Library at Kepler College too. In 2018, you remember this, Laura, she took on the monumental task of coordinating the United Astrology Conference. Laura's focus is on the karmic and evolutionary issues in the horoscope and on helping clients deal with and heal past life patterns. So a warm welcome, Laura. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Frank. Wow,
Thank
every time, I hear my bio in one form or another, I'm like, okay, I'm tired already.
you. I,
Tired.
I think the reason for creating bios is to remember and remind yourself what you've done over the years. So before we start looking at the chart, can you give me an idea of your working week in terms of the astrology? Is most of your working life focused on astrology for clients and teaching? How does it balance out?
It has changed and morphed over the years. I started out as um, the dominant part of my income was centered on teaching and uh, doing client work. And then it morphed into one third of it was client work, one third of it was teaching, and then one third of it was conference work. And then over time, client work kind of dropped down a bit. I was caring for my mother. Teaching dropped down a bit, even more, caring for my mother. Uh, Focused more on conference work. And then when she passed, it was rebuilding client work and teaching again. And teaching has taken on a different form. Instead of teaching out of my home, of course, with COVID and even before then, we were doing online, and I became partners with Patricia Walsh and Rose Marcus, two evolutionary astrologers, two big powerhouse women who we teach, have created a school called Soulwise, Soulwise School of Evolutionary Astrology. So we teach evolutionary astrology. I teach basics through the school, and then we teach a 52 plus week course on evolutionary astrology that stretches over a year and a half to 2 years with a summer break. So in terms of client work now, I see probably on the low end. I mean, I've talked to astrologers who see 5 clients a day, and that's just not my gig, and it's never been my thing. I probably see 1 client a day, if maybe I would say top, I'll see 5 clients a week. And that's intentional. A lot of my energy is focused. And back, talking about UWAC, I started coordinating UWAC in the late summer of 2015 after my mother passed. And that took 2.5 years of coordination, working with a team of 30 people. And, that chewed up, that along with NORWAC, chewed up a majority of my time and really didn't give time for client work. So rebuilding my practice in that way, just letting people reach out to me and do referrals. And it's kind of easy. And as we kind of talked ahead of time, I'm focused on family, my grandchildren, and living a life that works for me at my age. So,
yeah. And the new school that you founded with Rose and Patricia, how would you sum that up? How is that different from any other approach or school? Where's the focus?
well, as three evolutionary astrologers, all trained directly by Jeffrey Green, who wrote the book Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul back in the mid 80s. He was the astrologer in my mother's bookstore, Astrology et al., which she founded in 75. Jeffrey came in 76. He started teaching and developed his model of Pluto representing the soul, wrote the book. I studied directly with him, one of his earliest students. And so the approach is to zero in on the very depths and bottom line of the soul path. Why is a primary question that we ask in evolutionary astrology. Why this lifetime? Why here? Why now? Why these particular elements in this particular chart? This asking the question why really suits me, Frank, in the way, because what it does is when I ask the question why, I am leaving my mind and consciousness open for possibility versus trying to import or have a narrative that's already suited or what I think should be of the chart. So why that particular orientation? Why that particular placement? And so it's just a habit, a good habit that I developed from the very beginning to ask internally the question why. This opens my mind again to the possibility of the chart and listening to my client and feeling and listening to the chart, because I have the foundation of all of the necessary tools for this. And I've been teaching for 30 years, the basics of astrology. So I don't have to think about that element, but I need to think about how and wonder and imagine. So think, wonder, and imagine what these combinations of planet signs, houses, and aspects could possibly mean for this person. So what I tell my clients and my students, and I'm very clear on, is that past lives are a useful tool, whether they exist or not. It's a useful tool as a narrative for the chart. It allows me to speak from a past dynamic. It allows space for the client not to feel pigeonholed, and allows them space to talk and bring forward information as they need. And part of that what I tell them is that it's a useful tool. We'll use it as story. I can't tell you for sure whether past lives exist or not, but we find it valuable in helping to understand your natal chart. I firmly believe that you and I and every other living human being, and probably animals as well, have never lived another lifetime prior to this one, and we will never live another one after this one. And the reason I say that is because you and I and every other living creature on the planet are a one-off manifestation of our soul, never to be replicated again in time-space continuum. This form has never happened before. It was created for me in 1959 on January 17th, right? It didn't exist prior to that. Soul consciousness, in my opinion, existed prior to that. And an analogy I would use and often use is a relay race. And that the soul is running a long race, a marathon relay race. And that in each incarnation, the individual, the psyche, is handed the baton. That individual personality is handed the baton to carry forward the work of the soul. And so not only does it advance the evolution of the soul, it advances consciousness as well. So I am about helping my clients achieve a place of first understanding where their soul is coming from, which helps them frame their life possibly in a different way and give them a different understanding. And I try to move away from, and do move away from, looking at childhood as source. I have found over the years that people get reactive when you talk about their parents, or they'll either defend or get defensive, or there's a lot of different interesting mix around parent and childhood. And a really good book that helped inform a narrative around that is James Hillman's The Soul's Code. That the soul has its own trajectory. The soul has its own code. The daemon has its path. And the will of the soul will outweigh the will of the parents and its environment. That doesn't mean that the parents and the environment aren't important. It's just that the soul's will outweigh that. So I'm a nature versus nurture gal, though I believe nurture is important. As a parent and as a grandmother, as a human, I think how we nurture and foster other human beings is important. Does that answer your question?
That's a great answer. And that really sets up what you're going to be doing in part 2, no doubt, as well. So thank you for that. In terms of soul, I know people associate it with different things, and the idea of the relay race, or the marathon relay race, it's interesting that you have that belief, and I think that's very different from other people's when they use astrology in karmic terms. Do you believe then the soul is individual to the person, or it's a sort of source that's everybody? Do you have a feeling of that?
The nature of evolutionary astrology is that we believe, and I do believe this, that there is source, whatever you want to call that, God, goddess, universal consciousness, divinity, source. And from that source is manifested the souls that incarnate onto the planet. The souls are a spark or a manifestation or a creation of source. It is sources, the soul and its manifestation in human form is source experiencing itself in human form through many different carnations. And we believe that there are two dueling desires within the soul. This desire, so each of us experience this dueling desire constantly. The desire to merge with source, that profound nature of Pisces, Neptune's desire to merge with source, to become part of something that is a oneness. And the dueling desire, directly pulling in the opposite direction, is the desire to separate from source, which is the Aries-Mars experience. The impulse and instinct to separate from collective nature, from Pisces to Aries. And in the process of evolution through lifetime after lifetime, the soul will go through its separating desires. I want this, I want that, I am this, I am that. I manifest my will and my identity through these experiences over the millennia of evolution, whatever that means, who knows what that is. The soul begins to work itself through those separating desires, dropping them away, till eventually, through evolution of consciousness of the individuals, through each lifetime and the consciousness of the soul, the only desire that will be left is the desire to return to source. And so that's what we believe, and that when we apply this astrologically, we are looking at how we then articulate and the language style that we use to any individual, speaking to them where they're at. Not everyone is interested in the more spiritual elements of their life in an applicable way. Let me give you an example. If I have a client that comes into my office, and I always ask questions about who you are, what do you do, just gives me information. I always detail it back. I can look back at the back of my chart and go, oh yeah, she was the therapist who yada, 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 yada. Okay, she had 2 kids. But then I always ask the question, why are you here in my office today? Why do you want a reading today? Sometimes I'll say I'm curious, and then I'll say, yeah, a lot of people are curious, but why today? If you've always been curious, what brings you to this moment today? And if a client says, I've lost my job, or my relationship just fell apart, and I want to know when I'm going to have my next relationship or job, it's different from the person who says, I've lost my job or my relationship, and I really want to understand what this means to me. Those are 2 very different types of questions that can have 2 different narratives to them. And how I communicate to a client is possibly informed by the answer to that question. Right. So I'm not going to talk over and I'm not going to talk under people, although I don't like hierarchical language. When we say over and under, it tends to denote somebody is better and worse, and I don't mean that. We are all at our evolutionary stage where we're at for various reasons, for the right reasons, in fact. We're where we are. And so in evolutionary astrology, I work really hard to be non-judgmental. I have a basic framing that we call karmic necessity. Karmic necessity means that any individual and soul will attract to it, by definition, exactly what the soul needs for its evolution, regardless of the experience. The soul does not judge the experience as right or wrong, good or bad, owie or pleasurable, right? It just knows that it has an intention to evolve. And if there's one fate in the universe that I believe in, it is the fate of the soul to evolve itself and return to the source. And so by whatever means necessary, the soul will attract and the individual will attract the lessons it needs in order to evolve. And I believe that at birth, we are given every tool necessary that we need in order to effect that work.
So is there no failure then? So even the people that do horrendous things, it's still part of that journey. Is that how you reflect?
I do. And trust me, over 35 years of spiritual work and metaphysical and consciousness work, I struggle with that, but it's a belief I have. So for instance, I can have compassion for Hitler's soul and abhor Hitler, right? But again, do I want all the heinous, hideous things in the world to stop? Absolutely. I do not want them to occur. I want to be very clear. I want every child to be fed. I want everyone to have a home. I want everyone to have a job. I want everyone to have a healthy relationship. However, we're here to work. And that just doesn't always happen. In fact, it very rarely happens that we get all those things and all those things happening at once. And as harsh as it may sound, we will not be finished with all the heinous, horrible things on the planet until there are no longer souls who need those experiences. So what does that mean? How do I, as an evolutionary astrologer, then create the change I want? Not only in myself by doing my own work, but by one person at a time, hopefully affecting some level of new awareness about their life and who they are and where they're going. So one person at a time makes a difference. And I believe in the one drop in a bucket theory. Someday, somewhere, some lifetime, the last drop will be hit and the water will spill over the bucket and we will have enough. But we are not privy to the information of when that will occur. All I can do is keep soldiering on and doing my work and having compassion, true ultimate compassion for those souls who are experiencing what they're experiencing and compassion for the souls who are perpetrating those things. That doesn't mean I have to like the people, but I can have compassion for the situation and at the same time try to do something to affect change. It's a complex scenario and I can hold all of those concepts all at once because we are complex creatures and we can do that.
Thank you for that. So even so your job as an astrologer then is to make people aware of perhaps why they're here rather than necessarily to do anything other than they were destined to do, in the words of...
Yeah, destiny is an interesting element. You know, it's an interesting word. Fate's an interesting word. As I said already, I think there's one clear fate, and that fate is the course of our souls returning to source and evolving. Evolution is fate. I do believe in limited free will. You know, I can't walk through this wall in front of me. That's a limited free will, right? I may have the desire to walk through the wall, and I might get through it with a hammer and an axe and so on, but I can't literally just walk through it. And there's limited free will based on part of my soul's trajectory, you know, and there is fate in terms of the moment I'm born. My Saturn return was going to happen at the moment my Saturn return was going to happen. It was never going to happen any sooner or later, right? So there's a fate in that the cycles are already set in motion the moment I was put on the planet, the moment I came into being outside of my mother's womb, right? So those are elements of fate. And I think we do have choice, but I do, and I'm all about choice. I'm all about conscious choice. But how do we, well, I want to go back and talk about, I had a interesting aggressive debate, or my student had an interesting aggressive debate with me, and luckily I was calm, but he was absolutely adamant. I said, over something I had said that he was against. And I said, if you sat in that chair from this day until the day you took your last breath, you would still learn something and there would still be evolution. Right? So even if it looks like you're going backwards, even if it looks like you're doing nothing, I do believe that evolution is occurring, that growth in some way is occurring. You're not doing something wrong. And so I have mantras in my life that have served me since I was young. And one of them is, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing to fix, there's nothing to change. There's only something to do, which takes me out of the mindset, hopefully, that I have to fix something, I have to do something, I have to try to control something. In many ways, probably always, I have no control over.
So there's work to do.
There's work to do. I'm a good Capricorn. There's always work to do.
Of course. And that work is seen in the horoscope. It's seen in natal transits, progressions, the whole bag.
The whole thing. And I'm all about helping my clients reframe old stories. We cannot change the past experience, but we can change our story around it, which then flushes forward and backwards like domino effects into the past and into the future in terms of how we deal with events in our lives. A hurt that we might have sustained at 6. If we go back and reframe that as an adult, we get a different experience as we move forward. We begin to release emotional energy. As an evolutionary astrologer, we believe that evolution occurs in the emotional body. So our work is about bringing people back to their body, bringing people into an embodied emotional experience, doing the work that the soul intended to take on to process those emotions and move through them so that we can have a healthier mindset, a healthier body, a healthier emotional body. When we're embodied at an emotional level, we remember things better. The moon is related to our memory. When we're embodied and engaged emotionally, we are more present. We experience more, we pay attention. We're more attuned to what's happening in our body, in our world. We're less likely to create negative story and negative narratives that harm us at an emotional level and a physical level. So I'm all about helping my clients. If my client says to me, gosh, I never thought about it that way, that's something for me to think about. I really considered my job done.
Right.
Right.
And well, that comes to another question of mine. In terms of looking at what you've achieved, what you've worked through with clients over the years, if you could sum up how you'd like to be remembered, or if you don't want to think about that, what would you like to go out having impacted?
There's a number of things. I think that I'm most pleased in client work when my clients say to me, I came to the situation the other day and I heard your voice in the back of my head saying this situation might show up, and to stay present to it. So that in client work is really satisfying and gratifying that my clients are evolving and growing. In terms of my other work as a teacher, that I've impacted students in some way, that they go on to either be astrologers or use astrology in some way that is a healthy tool in their life. As a conference coordinator, particularly with NORWAC, what I'm proud of and want to be remembered for is bringing people together. That I created an environment where people felt seen, heard, connected, held, supported, and that I created an environment of diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of age, that I created something and that I took risks to do something that other people weren't doing. and stuck by my guns to do it. And I'm proud of those things. As to what people will remember me for, I don't know. Um, but I think that, because this is going to get me emotional, um, I think what I want to be most remembered, it sounds so sappy. There's my Capricorn speaking. I really want to be remembered by my grandchildren.
Yeah. Thank you. You mentioned, of course, Jeffrey Green, and you mentioned we've mentioned your mum. Are there any? They're probably the big mentors. Am I assuming correctly? Yeah. In terms of seeing astrology in that particular way, or?
Oh, definitely. Mom was fundamental in pushing Jeffrey to get his book written and get his work out there. They were partners, in terms of always talking about astrology, working things out. Mom was an evolutionary astrologer, adapted that work after Jeff came into her life. I would say that there was one other woman who was an mostly a tarot reader. She was in our bookstore. Her name was Char Rayner. And she was a big influence on my life. And it wasn't astrology. She was just a big influence on my life. In terms of my spiritual growth, she was always there for me through times where I needed some mystical, magical advice or some ritual to help me center myself. She was always there. And she passed away. And I have her prayer mala hangs in my car. So I always think about Char. And that's her name, Char. So she was important in my life as a mentor.
So it sounds like in some ways what she did for you is what you're attempting to do for clients and students. Very much.
And one other woman I don't want to forget is an amazing, powerful woman who has also passed. Diana Stone, astrologer out of Portland, Oregon, Vancouver, Washington. They're right across the river from one another. She was also a shaman, and she assisted me astrologically and spiritually through my life and through the life of my children as she was on the planet. And she was a big, huge presence at Norwalk for many, many years. A truly hilarious Aquarius, just completely irreverent, would say the most outrageous, hysterically funny things that you could imagine. And when I have listened back to the audio, and part of me is a little bit, I can't believe I'm laughing at that because that's so inappropriate and so wildly not good in this day and age. But it's, at the time, 80s and 90s, it was freaking hilarious.
Yeah, I think if you can do it with humor, yes, you can get a lot done and said with humor. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. In the second part, we're going to have a look at how you would approach a chart and start with that. So we'll end this session and start back in a moment. Thank you. Thank you.